wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilk and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Welcome to the award-winning TV show Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I am David Tamayo, president of Hispanic American Free Thinkers and longtime host of this show. And today I have the pleasure, the honor to have with me Mr. Hilaire, I always get stuck in that, Hilaire Sobers.
Thank you,
And before you say anything, I want to make sure I get this right. You're a human rights specialist for the Organization of American States, representing Jamaica, and you also co-host two online programs, Skeptically Speaking, this is for you to say, and the Yardie Skeptics,
yes.
which is a radio show. And you're also working, very important, you're also working with Clive Forrester, and you're in the advanced stages of completing an anthology of narratives for non-believers in Jamaica and the Caribbean. Is that correct?
That is so. Thank you very much, David.
Welcome to the show.
And thank you for having me. It's my first time.
But not the last, right?
No, definitely not. But it's a great pleasure to be with you. Great pleasure to be engaging with our viewers as well.
Yeah, and I think, I'm hoping to get them hooked on doing the show because we get to talk to the most interesting people we can come across. And one of those is someone who we have today. We have Katherine Ozment, who's the author of a fantastic book. Well, I'm already putting in my opinion, but Grace Without God. Yes. It's a book that has been acclaimed to be a wonderful book, very unique in the way it presents things. And so we're going to have the opportunity to talk to her a little bit later in the show. And for now, we're going to be doing all kinds of things. We're going to be talking about news, announcements, maybe a joke, person of the week, all kinds of things. I hope you brought a joke because I couldn't think of one.
I brought in a risque joke.
Okay,
sure.
well, we'll do that last.
We'll do that last, yes.
So
yes.
I guess we have maybe like less than 10 minutes now.
Okay.
So why don't we start with some announcements?
All right, first announcement is we're very proud to inform you of the 16th Annual Free Thought Festival, which will take place in Sacramento, California on October 15. And speakers include Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson, who I interviewed once.
Yes, she's wonderful.
She is wonderful.
Very smart.
And she's an accomplished author and all of that. Larry Decker, David Smalley, and others, incling David Tamayo.
They had to screw up somehow.
I know. I had to put you in. But the day before, on October 14, they'll have the Secular Leadership Day for those interested in learning from many successful leaders.
Yes. And the second announcement that is kind of related to this is Skepticon 10. They have this every year. They've had it for a long time. It's in Springfield, Missouri, or Missouri, as the people there say. And it's really wonderful. Both of these are free events for people. So I encourage people to go to these events in the sense of, so if you want to learn something, this is a place to be. There are a lot of people you can meet. Again, you have, it's an opportunity to become familiar with and educate yourself. It's like going to the library, only a lot more fun. But Skepticon 10 is on the 10th, so you see there's the 10th and 10th through 12th of November, and in Springfield, Missouri. And again, it doesn't cost anything. It's fun. It's an atmosphere of meeting other people, and so I've been there a couple of times. And let me tell you, it's an amazing event, and I'm hoping that in California it'll be very, very similar. So now this week in news, we got tons and tons of news. So I think we got what? Christians are more likely to say that it's poor people's fault that they're poor.
Yes.
damn.
Yeah,
We have a Christian pastor that has gone very publicly to say that the Bible supports us bombing North Korea.
North Korea, yes,
Now,
yes,
do you remember what he said? It was Romans 13
Yeah,
or
he
something.
cited Romans.
So
Romans 13.
The Bible has never been used to create wars or anything. Isn't that great?
No, not at all. Not at all.
And then we have good news in your
good
Jamaica.
News. Well, good news in a way. I mean, Jamaica now is a place where there's a lot of focus. I would say a lot of debate on the question of buggery, otherwise known as anal sex, particularly between men. And we still have a law in Jamaica that criminalizes that act, whether between men and men or women and men. But the bishop, the Anglican bishop of Jamaica, has come out very strongly against the idea of criminalizing consensual sexual activity.
So in other words, he's in the wrong side according to religion.
Yes, because he's been getting a battering at home, from what I call the Christian Taliban.
So that's good news. He's supporting,
he's supporting
eliminating
a more
those
progressive
laws.
approach.
Yeah.
But it's for me, it's a bit sad. It's a bit of an embarrassment, actually, that we're still having this discussion.
Listen, everywhere. There's a study that came out, and it's it relates a lot to what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes.
There's a new report that came out in the Journal of Nature Human Behavior, and it talks about a survey that was done over 3,000 people, and of course, it's how you spin the results. It basically, the first headline I saw, it says, even atheists believe that atheists are criminals or bad people or something along that.
Liable to.
Yes. And so it turns out that they did a 3,000 people survey in 13 countries, and they put in some questions in there, and 60% came out to imply or say somehow that that if someone commits a crime, most likely that they're atheists, or most likely that they're non-believers.
Right.
And so that's it's tough because it really shows, and I haven't looked at the details of the study, how good it was statistically, et cetera, because part of the problem with a lot of studies is how you interpret things.
Right.
But I think one thing that is fairly obvious here is that religion for thousands of years has done a good job at inculcating and telling people that religion equals good. Opposing religion or questioning religion, it is bad.
Yes.
So that's the. We'll talk more about that and morality and that kind of stuff. So.
Yes, and then
what's the other?
The other headline that we pulled out is last Tuesday, Malaysia's federal minister, Datuk Seri Shahidan Kasim.
Easy for you to say.
He's called upon fellow Malaysians to help the authorities in locating atheist groups. He said that groups such as the Kuala Lumpur chapter of Atheist Republic have no place under the country's federal constitution. According to the minister, the federal constitution does not mention atheists. It goes against the constitution and human rights. And in his words, I suggest that we hunt them down vehemently, and we ask for help to identify these groups, he said, adding that most of these atheists converted from Islam due to lack of religious education.
I mean, to me, this is no different than when the Inquisition was telling people, "Hey, go tell on somebody that is doing something wrong," and people would go and say, "Yes, I saw, Joe down the street who I happen to owe a lot of money. I saw him spitting on the cross." And so now the Inquisition will take care of him. We saw this with the Taliban when the United States invaded Iraq and when it invaded Afghanistan, and people coming out and say, "Oh yes, Taliban, the guy over there, he's bad, he's Al Qaeda over there." And these people are being turned in by neighbors. And we saw this with the Nazis. We've seen this in so many. Really, what could go wrong with something like this, right?
Yeah. Well, it's. Unfortunate. I mean, because as you know, this sort of mentality, because as you know, in Saudi Arabia, atheism is equated to terrorism.
Yes.
So it's pretty much that kind of thinking. It's a similar thinking that that comes out of that kind of
primitive.
Yeah, I mean it's driven on intolerance.
Okay, so we got about 2.5 minutes,
Yes.
and I want to get to the person of the week. The person of the week for this week is going to be Richard Dawkins. Now, Richard Dawkins has done a lot of things. A lot of people criticize him for good reasons or bad reasons or whatever. But there's no doubt that he has done a lot for the movement. He's written a lot of books on science and on philosophy or religious thinking, etc. But one of the things that he has done is also he's given a lot of money and done a lot of things in that respect. But last week, he was prevented or he was disinvited from speaking in California because of his criticism of Islam. Notice, that he's done much more criticism of Christianity. But part of what religions do is they try to inculcate this fear, and Islam is one of them, where they say, "Oh, let's not question Islam because otherwise we're going to be violent." And that, to me, is he is doing something good. He's trying to promote secularism and get the discussion going. The problem has been, this is from a group. Our people, our secular people, that have prevented him from speaking there, and basically, to me that's a step backwards, big time. It's a step backwards, big time. So we need to speak out against this. This is a place, a radio station, in a place from a chain of stations that was started for freedom of speech.
Yes.
And it's been really silenced, and
Yes.
so that's the beginning of the end, in my opinion. We need to watch out for that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So, I don't know. That's a guy, So now we got 1 minute left.
1 minute left.
How about if you read the joke, and see how it goes on that?
Okay, I have a little joke for everybody. Anyway, 3 young candidates for the priesthood are told by the Monsignor that they have to pass one more test. It's called the celibacy test. The Monsignor leads them into a room and tells them to undress. And a small bell is tied to each man's penis. In comes a beautiful woman wearing a sexy belly dancer costume. She begins to dance sensually around the first candidate. Ting-a-ling goes the bell. "Oh, Patrick," says the Monsignor, "I am so disappointed in your lack of control. Go take a long cold shower and pray about your carnal weakness."
So cold shower for him.
Cold shower for him. The candidate leaves. The dancer continues dancing around the second candidate. And she continues peeling off her layers of veils and so on. And of course, the same sound, ting-a-ling, comes from
The second candidate.
So Monsignor says, "Joseph, you too are unable to withstand your carnal desires. Go take a long cold shower and pray for forgiveness." The dancer continues, dancing naked in front of the final candidate. Nothing. She rises up and down against his body. No response. Finally exhausted, she quits. "Michael, my son, I am truly proud of you," says the Monsignor. "Only you have the true strength of character needed to become a priest. Now go join your weaker brethren in the showers." Ting-a-ling!
So I get it. Anyway,
Yes, the bell goes off.
we'll be right back.
All right,
Don't leave.
I won't.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntly and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. As promised, today we have the great pleasure to have via Skype Katherine Ozment, the author of Grace Without God, The Search of Meaning, Purpose, and Belonging in a Secular Age. Welcome, Katherine Ozment. We're not hearing you very well, but okay, we're good now, it seems.
Okay.
Oh,
Hey,
yes,
there
we're
you
hearing you.
are.
We're hearing you. Good.
So thank you for joining us. We've really been looking forward to talking to you today and asking you easy questions, tough questions, and maybe, but one thing for sure, and you probably already noticed, we made a liar out of Richard Dawkins now. He says that this show has humor, and we're trying, but maybe you'll be able to help us out a little bit, Katherine.
Oh,
Yes.
carry on.
So you got this book that came out about a year ago, and rather than going chapter by chapter and and then having people say, well, I already know what it says, I'm not going to buy it. We're gonna go and actually talk about some sort of side ideas on this. For instance, is this a theology book, a self-help book, or how would you categorize this book?
So I would call it both a personal and journalistic exploration of a cultural phenomenon that's happening in this country right now, which is people leaving organized religion in really large numbers.
Okay, all right. If I might ask, I'm very interested in your particular, your philosophy and worldview. I noticed I listened to an interview that you did with Stephen Spiro in January, in which you pointedly declined to describe yourself as an atheist, and you said that you prefer to be described as an agnostic. Could you tell me why that is, given that you expressly said, I do not believe?
Sure. Yeah, the word agnostic to me feels the most natural, label for myself. I guess I've come to the conclusion that living with the question is okay for me. And so that was one of the conclusions I came to at the end of the book, was that I don't have definite answers either way. And that, in fact, my human brain may not be up to the task of contemplating God or eternity or things like that, because it is just this human brain. And so I've settled on agnostic as a way of sort of saying, this is, I don't know for sure that there is a God. I don't know that there isn't a God. I know that I don't organize my life around the belief in God, so it's not really a part of my day-to-day living. But I may die and come to realize there's some God waiting for me at the end. So I don't know how not to call myself as an agnostic when I have such a sense of openness still to the question.
Okay.
Well, so my son tends to call himself an agnostic also. And I tease him a little bit because I say, well, are you agnostic about Zeus? And he'd say, oh, no. Are you agnostic against Thor? And then, well, which God are you agnostic about? So let me ask you, what God are you agnostic about?
Well, again, I think that my brain and this human form that I live in, I think, I'm a materialist. I think it's all, this is what we are where we are. That is my belief. We're made up of cells and bones and skin and hair. And I don't believe in the soul and all that stuff. And yet, maybe my physical form, which my brain is part of and contained in, does not have the capacity to understand something beyond the physical. And so that's why I leave open that little sort of just glimmer of possibility. I don't feel like I know it all enough to say there is no God.
And just to point out, Richard Dawkins, who we just saw a minute ago there, giving a plug for us, he categorizes himself as an atheist agnostic because, an atheism is a belief. You believe or don't believe. And an agnostic is a knowledge. The opposite of gnostic, knowing, is the opposite, agnostic. And so therefore, he puts himself there. And as every scientist or everyone would put there, you can't claim a negative. You can't without having to prove it. And so you say, I don't believe, but I'm also an agnostic. I know Matt Dillahunty calls himself an atheist agnostic, and I tend to refer myself that way also, an atheist agnostic. I don't believe in any gods, but and if someone proves one, I'll be ready to believe it. But at the same time, I don't know if there is one or not. Maybe there's a God somewhere, and
But, yes, but with all due respect, I mean, look, we can kind of establish through hypothesis and testing of hypothesis that the deities, certainly the gods that are claimed by religion, do not exist.
The ones that are claimed, exactly,
exist.
yeah.
They do
but
not exist.
But there may be one. There may be one. Yeah, there may be one. For
example, you cannot have a deity that is both omnipotent and omniscient.
And moral
right,
at the same time.
And not at the same time. Okay, so what I'm saying is that the hypothesis fails.
Yeah.
So for me to say, well, I'm kind of agnostic, well, even though the hypothesis fails, I'm agnostic. We're not agnostic about things like the Loch Ness Monster or
no, but
So for me, I think that when we say we are agnostic, okay, we're kind of giving a kind of almost backways nod to religion and giving it a certain respect that it does not deserve. But anyway, I don't want to...
I disagree. I have to disagree with you. I feel that to be agnostic is to say there may be something beyond what humans can know. And to think that humans can know everything is, I don't buy that. I feel like we are these physical creatures running around the earth, and that we are limited. And,
but you would agree that
maybe it is true that there is no God, but I just feel that who's to say? To acknowledge the doubt and acknowledge the uncertainty, I actually think is sort of stepping above the fray of that, trying to decide yes or no, and saying, well, for now in my life here on earth, I don't believe in God, but that's not to say that after I die, there won't be something, and maybe not the thing that's been defined by religion. It could be something completely different. I'm just open to that.
So, who's the intended audience of this book? When you were writing it, who who was the target of this book? Was it the
Well, so
religious?
it's really interesting. When I started writing it, it started as a magazine article. And right as I was beginning the article, the Pew Foundation came out with these dramatic statistics about people like me who had left organized religion. At the time, in 2012, that was 20% of the American adult population and 33% of millennials. It's since gone up to 25% and 40% of millennials. In just a very short period of time. So I started to think about my magazine article and then the book that grew out of it as a story of and for those people. I studied those people. I spent time with them. I talked to people about why they're living religion and what they were doing instead, if anything, to sort of make up for any parts of it that they missed. In many cases, they didn't miss any parts of it, but many people miss the community and some of the rituals and things like that. And so the book is really for that, 1/4 of Americans, and also for religious people who are curious about why so many people are leaving their churches and synagogues and mosques. Why is this happening? And a lot of, I think, religious leaders want to understand these people. They're called the nuns, not Catholic nuns, but none of the above nuns, because they check none of the above when asked what they are. And I think a lot of people are curious about them. So it's really for them, and it's for people who want to know why people would leave religion.
Right. But, I kind of have to wonder, though, having read the book with great interest, whether or not you're not attempting to kind of give religion a kind of makeover and to kind of hybridize it with secularism. You, for example, say that at the first most basic level, religion satisfies our need to know our place in the universe. And I have to say, I challenge that. Doesn't it give us simply a working hypothesis of why we are here as opposed to satisfying that need? In other words, isn't it more like an existential placebo, than really giving you something substantive?
Sure, and it may be a placebo, but it's something. And I think so many people have gravitated to religion because they're trying to make sense of things, and they almost, our human brain craves meaning and craves purpose.
Right.
I talk about the studies.
You did talk about it. It's that the mind is the humans are mean-making machine. Mean-making machine, right?
Yeah. And
right, and so I think that so many
yeah.
people have created religions and gravitated to religions as this way of finding sort of a framework to attach to, because life is really kind of scary and uncertain and difficult. Right. And so religion gives them answers and a sense of comfort and solace in many ways.
Right, so in other words, you're saying, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that religion has its purpose, has some beneficial purpose to humanity.
Well, I think it has through history, and I think it's losing that grip now. I think as we come up with new explanations of the universe and why we're here and what our purpose is, and we start to look at secular humanism and just all of the benefits of having this great scientific knowledge that we now have, that religion is less important. And you can see that happening in our country with these statistics, that it's falling away as the way people organize the way they think about their lives.
Okay.
Yes, and we'll get back to that. I wanted to not deviate from the nuns yet. So maybe you can mention a little bit about the numbers, that millennials are a little bit different, and you mentioned that. The book, in your book, you mentioned that the millennials are growing faster than every other group. But I also want to point out that the Great Agnostic, it's a good title, the Great Agnostic, Robert Ingersoll, I remember reading some of his books, and once he predicted in 1869, he predicted that in less than 100 years, because of science, religion was going to go away. And then in 1969, 100 years later, when you look, you could say, we have flower power, and we have the free love and all of that going on, and yet these same free love people became the conservatives of the 1980s, and it looks like the pendulum just swung the other way. Do you think that the millennials are going to be swinging back once they start having children and all of that?
The research suggests not. The research suggests that we are secularizing in much the same way that Western European countries like England have, and that we are just doing it at now an accelerated rate. So where it took England a century or more to secularize, we're doing it over a matter of decades. And they talk about generational displacement, where each generation now is less religious across all dimensions of belief, behavior, and belonging than the generation that came before it. And the thing with that is that it starts to grow exponentially. So like my kids who are being raised with no religion are much less likely to pop back into it when they get married and have kids, which had always been the trend. People would kind of move out of religion in their 20s when they went to college, got their first job, and then they'd have a family and they'd go back to whatever they had experienced as children. But if you're looking at this huge millennial swath of 40%, not being raised with any religion or identifying with a religion, they're really not feeling nostalgic for church when they have kids. So you can see how this starts to expand exponentially. And so the latest research shows that, you know, for many, many decades, America has been held out as the counter example to the secularization thesis, that as countries modernize, they become more secular. Well, now that we're showing this research of these, you know, this demographic change happening through the generations, we're no longer the counterexample. We now fit that narrative. And so it's turning out that that secularization thesis that people have been trying to show as ironclad across the world is really coming true.
Now, it's... do you have any plans to take this book and translate it to other languages? Because they're similarly in other cultures, and you mentioned this in the book, in the US we have all these different cultures within the country that are, so Hispanics, for instance, are moving in the same, you know, secularizing that way, and this book is perfect for them.
Yes.
Especially in those cultures where religion and culture are intertwined. And so this book is, I think, a good way of being able to explain to people that, hey, you're not being a traitor to your family or your culture because you're doing things a little bit different when it comes to religion.
So my publisher sees this as a very American book because it's really all my research took place in the United States. Yeah, I'd love to see it in other languages, but that's really more of a business decision, I'm afraid.
Yes, or you know, volunteerism, getting some volunteers to.
There you go.
Yeah.
But if I might go back to your philosophy, and I'm particularly interested in how you use the word grace, which of course is part of the title.
In the title, yeah.
And you said, certainly in your Q&A, which is on your website, like a lot of language used for profound human experience, grace is often used in a religious connotation. Ultimately, you define it. I mean, you say it's a welling up of awe, wonder, gratitude for this gift unbidden our very lives. If we peel back the religious labels, these are essential human experiences we all share. Oh, and then you say that these experiences are not owned by religion. We non-religious people have them too, and we need a language to describe them. Now, if we do indeed need a language to describe them, why do you ultimately rely on a religious term? In other words, why not use some other term?
Right.
That's what.
Well, there probably is another term, but I don't know that it captures the same idea. And so I guess that's what I was wrestling with throughout the book. I talk a lot about labels and language and how we express the most profound experiences we have. And because religion has sort of dominated that landscape, they've kind of owned it for millennia. The language that's come down to us is sort of has that baggage to it. And so the title is, you know, I think deliberately a bit provocative, and it's trying to get at the idea that, you know, we have that experience too. I feel incredibly grateful for my life. I just focus on the gift of it and not the giver. And that other secular people are having those experiences. And grace is also used in the title, at least, as an umbrella term for a lot of sort of the good things that people did once get from religion and may miss. And I talked to a lot of people about those things. But what I really wanted to look at was the language. And I looked at the word spirituality too. And that's a word that's always bothered me because it means so many different things. It's so vague.
But you identify as spiritual.
Well, I go into great detail at the end of the book about secular spirituality. And I redefine spirituality for myself as having really nothing to do with God or a spirit or an unseen energy. But it's really a creation of connection with other people, with nature, with animals, with you know, the beauty around us and the things that interest us in our lives. And so for me, that became a really interesting development. It was a way to think about myself as secular and spiritual at the same time. It doesn't have anything, again, it's without God.
Right, but I know, but spirit tends to conjure up religious concepts, you know.
And that's I'm a little. The problem is that I see that, and I've been, you know, fairly often when I'm having discussions or debates with religious people, one of the accusations is, well, you're just another religion like anybody else, and therefore, you know, yeah, you have the right to believe anything you want. Just let me believe whatever I want, and we both said that we're both right, kind of thing. Or there's no way for us to know that either one of us is right or wrong. And so the problem with the word spirituality is that, you know, it makes it a lot easier for the religious people. Well, one is less threatening for the religious people because I think atheism is far more dangerous an idea than it is another religion. And second is the idea, it makes it easier for them to just point a finger and say, you're just a religion like anybody else, you know, so... What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting because my book does encompass also the nuns, that group we talked about earlier. It includes the spiritual but not religious. And that's probably the biggest proportion of the nuns. The atheists are actually a very small group, and that may be because of the stigma tied to atheism that keeps people from coming out of the closet. But I wanted to capture that idea. And so the idea of spirituality really came to me through the study of awe and all the research that's being done on awe right now. And how these physiological changes happen in our bodies when we experience awe. So I compare that to a religious person thinking about God or being in a great cathedral and worshiping. And how we can have that in our secular lives, that feeling of awe out in nature, or in the example I gave with my children, and feeling connected to the cycle of life and to human life. And that, to me, that connection, which is absolutely here on earth, and it's about a very physical connection, is what I call now spirituality. But and I know the word is tricky, and all these words are so tricky because they've come down through the religious lens.
But why don't we avoid using them? In other words, why don't we avoid using them? Because they're so tricky. In other words, what you just described is kind of human interconnectedness. Why don't we just stick with that?
Well, and we can say that too. I think what I was trying to capture is a unique, we're in a very interesting time right now, which is that we are leaving religion, and yet religion holds all this sort of history of how, you know, people will assume that if you're not religious, you must not be moral, and you must be this and you must be that. And I'm trying to just steal some of that stuff. I mean, I'm trying to say, you know,
I would say not so much steal it as getting it back.
So yeah, there you go. Peeling off the labels, peel off those labels and say, you know what, for me, spirituality is spending time with my kids and appreciating the beauty of their skin and their hair and their thoughts and all that.
Katherine, we have Dante from Fairfax on the phone. Go ahead, Dante.
Hi, I was just wondering,
I barely hear it.
Spirituality, maybe use the term solidarity. That's one that I've heard a lot used. Anyway, I'm just curious if that term works, and I'll take my answer off the air.
Did you hear that, Katherine?
I didn't quite hear that.
Say it again?
Let's Dante, could you repeat the question again?
Instead of a spirituality, could you maybe use the term solidarity instead, just as a thought? I'll take my answer off the air.
Okay.
So he suggested that solidarity.
Yeah, that has a different connotation to me. I think that when I'm talking about, maybe, you know, it's a lack of finding the right word, but solidarity to me feels more of a political, has a more political sound to it for me. But I appreciate the question. I think we're groping for some of these words. I think we are at really the beginning of a huge change, and we're recreating this stuff. Or, like you said, we're getting it back from where it was before all the labels and all this, you know, religion came in and took over. And so it's about talking this through and trying to figure out what the best words are.
And it's important to note, you mentioned this sort of, but I think it's important to clear up that the nuns are composed by a lot of people that do believe in God, and people that do have a belief. They just don't have a formal religion that they go to it, and so it's good. I mean, I like the nuns because the way I see it is they're not contributing money to churches and continuing, buying, $60 million jets for preachers, etc. All that money that could be used for other stuff. I don't know, little things like cure of cancer or whatever. But and so we want to encourage that. And sometimes I think we forget fairly often that that's the case. That it's composed of a lot of religious people, just religious people, or people that are believers, not religious. And one of their criticisms in Amazon was from someone who said, "Oh, worst theology book I've ever read." And I'm thinking, okay, I didn't think it was a theology book. And and the argument was she confuses religion with faith. And I disagree, but this is a good time for you to respond to those kinds of responses that perhaps you were confusing faith with religion.
Okay. So I didn't read that necessarily, but I looked at the book begins with this exploration of the nuns, and when you're looking at nuns, what you're really looking at is affiliation, so what you call yourself. So that probably is different than faith. I also go in later into the sort of belief in God has gone down slightly, and people also have started to define God differently. So if maybe that's the faith part, I do talk about that a bit. But the rise of the nuns, which we talk about and hear about a lot, that's just measuring one aspect of religiosity. So that's belief, behavior, or belonging. That's belonging. What do you call yourself? What tribe do you affiliate with? And as you just pointed out, these are people who've left institutions, but they may still hold on to their beliefs and their faith. And I felt I did talk about that, but I think that the book begins and is focused in the beginning in sort of what do we call ourselves now? It starts with my son asking me, what are we? And because my husband and I have left religion, I blurt out, we're nothing. Because I didn't have the word. Again, I'm at a loss for words about these things. And so then it goes into affiliation, and that's really the main focus of the first part of the book. But it does move into faith later in the book.
Yes.
Maybe that reviewer didn't read the whole thing.
Yes.
Oh, trust me, there were some reviewers there that didn't read the book, and you could tell.
Yeah, but I'd love to ask you another question, and this is in relation to you mentioned Rebecca Hensler, who has an online grief group, and she said often she hears that non-religious people like herself cannot possibly find meaning without God or belief in the afterlife. But she said, to say you need the afterlife to have meaning is the bleakest form of insanity. And I substantially agree with that. But my question to you isn't religion overall, broadly speaking, to the extent that it focuses on the otherworldly, that which is not realistic, a pretty bleak form of insanity, which you seem to want to have wedded to modern forms of secularism.
Yeah. And I love that interview. She would actually be a great person for you guys to interview at that point. She's wonderful, and she has created this website called Grief Beyond Belief to help people who are going through great loss and they don't want to hear that their loved one is in a better place. And so, she was talking about the afterlife and how that's not really helpful. If you're an atheist and someone you love dies, you don't really want to hear about that. And I guess, throughout my book, there's every chapter is different and talks about different things. Yeah. But the main thing I was looking at least in the beginning of the book, was how religion has been remarkable at organizing people into groups for good and ill. And the question I have throughout the book, and still as I go around and talk about it to different groups, how do we organize ourselves? How are we going to do things together and get out of our individualistic pods? And one example is that the evangelical Christians and the nuns make up an equal proportion of the voting population. So they're both roughly 20%. But evangelical Christians vote at twice the rate as the nuns. And so you can see the problem right there. We're not represented in government. We end up with a Donald Trump for a president. And so my question throughout the book was, how do we tap into some of what religion did to organize people? And maybe we can't. Maybe we're it's just apples and oranges. But my fear is that we're all going to go our individualistic ways and not come together to be a force in our government and therefore in people's lives. And I think that's a legitimate thing that we just haven't figured out yet.
Now, we did get somebody to text in a question saying, okay, so where do you find grace without God?
Yeah, well, I definitely find it with my family. And I wrote about that, and I called a researcher who studies awe, and I said, I live in Chicago. There's not a lot of natural beauty in my city. The lake is nice, but it's pretty flat, it's pretty plain, it's very cold in the winter. So I'm not going to be going to the Grand Canyon every day and feeling overwhelmed and overpowered by natural beauty. And I said, but I really feel very like this incredible connection, this sense of stillness comes over me, and this sense of just gratitude for my life when I'm with my daughter putting her to bed. And I look at her skin, and I just look at her physical body and think, how did this person come to be here? And how incredible that she can read and talk and breathe. And I mentioned all this to the researcher, and she said, well, that's awe too. And you don't have to go out and find some amazing view to feel it, to have that physiological change come over your body of stillness and appreciation. You can feel that whenever you're feeling connected to the cycle of life, to nature. And if you start to become more aware of that, you have those experiences more often. And I think it gives your life more meaning to have those. At least it does for me.
Now, does your book address, so you do a lot of comparisons with religion. Personally, I think you're a little bit too soft on religion there, because I see, and you do mention, that religion has some values in the end of life part and all of that, but I also look at it and say, yeah, but I also see the other side of the coin. End of life, religion often gets in the way. If you want, assisted suicide and euthanasia, and we do things for a dog that are humane that we're not allowed to do to humans, and all in the name of religion. And women's rights, reproductive rights, often controlled by the morality of religion. So, isn't this? Trying to compare and trying to do a lot of the things that religion does, isn't that well a little bit poisoned?
Well, it's interesting because the chapter on death, where I talk about that, is really a chapter on solutions, I thought, more than looking at religion. I think I was looking for people like Rebecca Hensler, Grief Beyond Belief, and different rituals, and a humanist celebrant who talks about how to create a meaningful funeral program for people whose loved one has died if they don't believe in God. And I think the idea was that, the book's about all the bad that religion has done and not believing in God anymore. I feel like those were done. And done really well. And I met enormous numbers of people who said, Richard Dawkins saved my life. He gave me a way of thinking about the world that I didn't know existed when I came out of my very religious background. And that's the whole body of work and research and thinking and writing that's been covered pretty well. And so in my book, I wanted to look at, okay, well, now what do we do instead? And so in every chapter, I try to just offer sort of, okay, we don't believe in God. Let's just get that out of the way. Now let's talk about what to do instead. And so I tried to offer ways of, sometimes looking at religion, because religions are pretty good sometimes at, especially the Jewish religion has always held up as being great when someone dies. They have these rituals that bring people together, that provide food and sustenance for the person grieving, and a way to sort of walk through the pain of that time. And so I sort of looked at that and thought, okay, so what can we extract from there, and what's new? What can we also bring in that has nothing to do with religion? That's what I tried.
But
go ahead.
Yes, but okay, but I hear you, but I'm still I still have the same sort of impression reading the book that you treat religion, broadly speaking, as mostly a benign force. In fact, you said in relation to, you're referring to this church, Glide, and you said, and you're talking about Cecil Williams, who took it over in 1955, and he decided to return it to the true spirit of Christianity, welcoming anyone of any race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and economic circumstances. And I was frankly startled by this description of Christianity, particularly in this country, particularly given that it has been completely antithetical to welcoming people of any race, sexual, completely. So I'm wondering, how did you arrive at that particular conception?
I actually think your take on Christianity is narrow, and I think that it's partly the fault of the religious right who've taken over Christianity. And so now when we hear the word Christian...
No, it's not. I grew up in Jamaica, a very religious country. So I grew up with it. Trust me, I know.
There is research showing that people really do think, when they hear Christianity now, they no longer think of what they used to think of. It's now a blend of politics and religion, thanks to Jerry Falwell and the moral majority and everything that came after that. That now the Christian sort of brand has been sullied by that merging. But I met on my journey many mainline, moderate, liberal-thinking Christian ministers and Christian followers that I don't think fit that narrative at all. I don't think they fit that. I think they are welcoming, and I think they do want to do good. That church that I mentioned in San Francisco is one of the largest providers of services to homeless people in San Francisco. And so I wouldn't call that not welcome.
What I'm talking about is the basic theology, which is based on the Bible. Now, if you look very carefully at the theology, okay, it is not at all welcoming. Okay, it is antithetical to vulnerable groups. It is misogynistic. This is what is contained in the text. It's not what I find is that so-called moderates and progressives tend to kind of ignore it. They do their cherry picking, and with all due respect,
so there's a difference between what the book says and what people actually do. When it comes to the Bible,
what I'm saying is that to some extent, I have a lot more regard for the fundamentalists who say, oh, no man, to hell with this progressive crap. We're going to comply with what the book says. You know, so to me, there's a
people I researched,
dishonesty.
I remember one minister in particular, and he said, yeah, the Bible says some crazy stuff. And that's why, when I teach the Bible in the church, I have to interpret it and I have to bring it up to date, and I have to say, obviously we don't believe this, but this is a primary teaching for us, and we can use it to organize our lives, and it's a long tradition that we can look back on. So I guess we can agree to disagree. Obviously, we're not going to come to agreement on this argument.
One question on which I thought was interesting. You mentioned that it's impossible to understand Western art and culture without religious literacy, correct? But to me, that the argument goes beyond that. That applies also to Eastern culture and Eastern art and Middle Eastern art. And so, would you be for teaching all religions, comparative religions in all public schools?
I think comparative religions as a cultural study is really important, and I think that people need to know. I think as more and more families like mine have no religious experience or religious exposure at all. I brought my daughter years ago to a field trip at an art museum with a bunch of her little second grade classmates. And there was a whole series of paintings of Jesus down this one hallway we were walking down. And I had about 12 girls in my group, and only one of them knew what the paintings were. And everyone else was, who's that naked guy?
Who's that hippie?
Yeah, exactly.
Long hair and beard.
And so I thought, well, they can't appreciate some of the great, it's a part of our history. But yes, it doesn't have to be just.
So do you attend a Unitarian church or ethical society or anything like that?
No, we don't really belong to any organized religious or secular group. We are kind of typical of the nuns in that we're not joiners. And I feel lucky that we live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of community service activity and there's a lot of sort of an undergirding of secular humanism that keeps people coming together for different things. So we do have a sense of community, but it's not based in any kind of religious organization.
Yes.
Okay, and so one of the things that I, with religion, of course, the problem is that it teaches a lot of things that, trust authority, and it basically sometimes has people turn off their critical thinking on anything that has to do with their religion. But let me ask you, related to your book, in what direction does your book, and we got a couple of minutes, but in what direction does your book give people that are stepping away from God, a support, or how do you think it affects them? This is something that may help them sort of go over the next step and say, okay.
Yeah. I hope it's helpful. I met a woman the other day at a reading I gave, and she came up afterwards and she said, "Thank you, because now I know I'm not alone." And so, many of us, like you and I, we're following this movement, and we're probably involved online and things. There are a lot of people who don't realize, and they maybe live in very religious communities, that there are all these resources out there for people who've left religion. There are so many community groups. Not only do I write about them and I interview them, I traveled the country for 3 years and interviewed people about their non-religious experiences. But at the back of the book, I provide a whole series of resources. So if people want to find out, is there an atheist or humanist community group in their area, here's a place where you can go and look that up. I hope it's both sort of an inspirational and also practical guide.
But so really, I mean, the way I see your book, in a way, it's secular humanism. I mean, it's a pure form of secular humanism, where a lot of that answers a lot of the questions of,
it's married to religion. Come on, David. It's married to religion.
Exactly, married to religion. So because to me, a lot of what are you? And I said, I'm a secular humanist. And of course, now they got to go look that up because they don't know what that is. Would you say your book is advocating for secular humanism? And we got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think it definitely is mostly geared towards secular humanism. I went looking for communities that would welcome a family like mine. I actually, volunteered and did things with a lot of secular humanist communities. And I liked that they were about something. I thought they were very family friendly. And I thought they gave me something to organize and create a framework to think about how to live my life in a more meaningful way.
Well, let me tell you, we could stay here all day long talking about all kinds of things, and we all have our own ways of looking at religion, and you can look at the half-empty cup or the full-empty cup, and they're very successful, obviously, at a lot of things, religion, and so trying to pick those things that they're successful about, I think is a clever way of trying to regain, some of the stuff that we have. I want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank
Katherine.
Our guests for being with us. And I told you we were going to give you some hard questions.
Yes, you did.
We didn't want to be all low balls or anything. So I hope you enjoyed your interview here, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.